Welcome to Real Talk, where I give real answers to real questions from real worship leaders. If you are a real worship leader with a real question and you want a real answer, submit your question down at this link right below, and I just might answer it on a future episode. Got some good questions this week? Let's talk about it. The first question is a follow-up of a question that somebody asked a while ago. I'm not even sure how long it would go, but I'm going to summarize the beginning because basically they said that they had a worship team leader who they didn't think was doing a very good job, and this person had experience in leading worship ministries, and they weren't sure how to give their advice to the person who they thought wasn't leading very well. So they took my advice, which was, I don't even remember what it was at this point, but whatever it was, it worked, and things started changing in their worship ministry. But we pick up from there talking about this worship leader who has fixed their worship leading. Hallelujah. But it says this: she seems to be indicating, though, that her and her husband might potentially leave in the next year or two, which makes me wonder some things. Our church is about 400 to 600 people. Her husband is the associate pastor and in charge of audio production. I used to be an audio engineer and lend a hand frequently there as well. My question is this: what does it look like honestly being in full-time ministry in a position like that? If what I'm sensing were to be true, and the board asks me to take over if they leave, when I was a worship director, it was for a multi-campus youth ministry, and though I put in 30 hours a week, I definitely wasn't paid. I've got a wife and family with a full-time job, and it'd certainly be a struggle to step away from a solid paycheck to potentially be a full-time worship leader / pastor. I do some audio work on the side, and I've been looking into voice acting as a side income. But I wonder how people like you and Jimmy Cooper from Hey Worship Leader, make it work, especially with Jimmy having a family. Not sure if you can forward the question on to him and get his take as well or not. Thanks, John. Well, I do think that Jimmy from Hey Worship Leader is better able to answer this question because he's got a family, and so it pertains to your situation a little bit more. So I asked him to give his answer. Jimmy, what do you think?
Thank you for asking the question, and I have several thoughts. Money is one of those topics that can be hard to discuss. So I have some initial thoughts, maybe a rant, and then I'll get to the question specifically on what it looks like for me. But here's some principles to keep in mind. When a church wants to pay for a worship leader, wants to hire a worship leader, I feel like it needs to be more about support to do the work of ministry. Like, what would it take to get this person to come do the work of ministry? I don't like when churches treat people like commodities. Now, churches need to pay people for the time that they put in. They need to do that. They should do that. They need to be good stewards with the money that they have, but they need to give them enough to support the ministry in the location where they live, where they are located and doing the ministry. So a certain financial number doesn't work of what should a worship leader get paid. I live in North Carolina, and the money I receive wouldn't go very far in a similar position like in California. So it's not about the number necessarily. But what I want to point out is that I don't think it's a secret that a lot of churches have taken advantage of people. They've often underpaid people for different reasons. Maybe it's lack of priority, or maybe just lack of resources, or maybe it's intentionally. And I mean, we see even this question where they state they put in 30 hours a week and definitely wasn't paid. And on one hand, that makes me, sad that someone puts in that amount of time and wasn't paid for it. But I like to think about it differently. It's not like ministers should be paid like it's about the money, but they should be supported well to do the work of ministry. I think that's the way to look at it, man. It takes money to do work. So it's not about the money. We're not out there just to get money, but without money, people are overworked and they become burnt out, and it's just not good for the health of the church or the health of the leader. So when I say we shouldn't treat people as commodities, I just mean the church shouldn't exploit people because people want to serve the church just to get free labor. It's kind of icky. Now, I'm not saying that's what's going on here, but I wanted to mention it because I know it happens a lot to musicians and creatives inside the church. I can think of another situation where let's just make up a hypothetical and see if it resonates with you all. The church needs a room painted, and there's a contractor who is in the church who can do it, and they say, hey, Bill can paint this for us and he'll charge us half the rate because he goes to church here. And so what they may not know is Bill's a contractor and he's struggling to make ends meet, and he's filling up his schedule already just to make it by, and they're just assuming that he's going to do it for free or at a highly discounted rate just because he's in the church. Now it's up to Bill, the painter, to decide if and when he can be generous, but it shouldn't be the church's first go-to move just to try to get what they can at a cheaper rate because people are in the church ready to serve. Okay, sorry for that little rant, but I kind of just wanted to put my thoughts into it. The church should not take advantage of people. Now, my thoughts for this specific person from the question that I have. The first one is, what is drawing you to this assignment if they do indeed ask you? Is it just because it would be an opportunity? Or do you think God is aligning your heart with this assignment? Is this something that you truly want to do? Because you mentioned you already have a full-time, potentially good paying job, and it might be God has you where he wants you so you can serve the church well for free in the areas and the time that you have to do that because you are supported with this other job. So I don't know that I would up and leave, like you said in the question, a good paying job to go serve the church but not have the funds to support your family. So I would think about that. What's leading you, or what would lead you to this job, even if they do ask you? The second one is, what will not getting paid what you need do to you and your family? Like, calculate what you would have to do to make ends meet, and then communicate that with the church so that there's this understanding that, hey, you guys can pay me this amount, and I'm used to getting paid this amount, so I'm going to have to make up funds somewhere, and just be super clear about that. And they may have like this extravagant job description, but you may have to whittle that back based on how much they can pay you. So I would just be in communication with the church about that. The third thing I wanted to mention, I think this is very important, is that the church's problems or issues financially are not yours, or don't have to be yours. So what I mean by this is, if they can't afford to provide what they think they want or they need right now in a worship leader, that problem isn't yours. You don't have to take that on. That's the church's problem. If they can't afford it, then they should wait and budget and wait till God has provided enough for that opportunity when it comes up. It's the same way I approach events or camps. You know, a lot of times I'll get called and say, hey, we have this week-long camp. We want you to come do it and bring a full band and come do it for $100 or something. Now that's drastic and that hasn't actually happened, but sometimes I get invited to events and the budget that they have for these events is just not realistic for me, who is now 40 years old, has a family, trying to get a full band together for us to come really prepared. I'll just say, hey, your budget is only this big. Let's dial things back. I can do an acoustic set, think of some other options. Or if they want something that big, I just say, hey, I'm sure there's other worship leaders out there who are younger, maybe less experienced, but that don't require this much funds, this much support to do the work of ministry that you need here in this specific time. So I try to just bring a realistic picture to what it costs to do the things that they need done. And the fourth thing I wanted to say is that if this assignment is something that God has for you, then he's going to support you. I don't want you to feel stressed about this. God will give you everything you need to do what he's called you to do, even in the assignment that you're in, or potentially the one that you might jump into if it's at this church. So I just want to encourage you in that. I don't want you to stress. I don't want you to make it all about money, but I also want you to prioritize your first assignments, which is you, your soul, and your family. Don't give up those two things to pour yourself out in ministry and neglect those more important things, your first calling. Now, as far as me and how I make it work specifically, our church is not rolling in the dough, but they take care of us, and we've agreed on what it would take for me to do the work of ministry in the area where I live and how much support I would need to get paid to, buy a house and do all the things I have to do. And, we've agreed on that. They've taken really good care of us. And having said that, just like the person who asked this question, I do work another job. The Hey Worship Leader is my part-time job, and I have to do that to make ends meet, and that's okay. We are in a place where this is something that we've all agreed that we can do. Yes, it would be amazing to make more money, but in this case, it's not about the money. It's about the support I can get to do the work of ministry. And right now, it's working out great for us. I trust our church. I love our church, and I'm thankful all the time. Even though we're not rolling in the dough, I'm thankful that we have a healthy church who is communicating, and we can work on these things together, because I know there's so much unhealth out there. I hope these answers and this rant and me just talking a bunch was helpful. Money is always this potentially icky thing. Those are my view. That's how I make it work. Spencer, back to you.
Thanks, Jimmy, for offering your answer. If you want to follow Jimmy, by the way, he's got a great YouTube channel called Hey Worship Leader. I'll link it down in the description below. I'm on a break from the worship team. I'm the main singer and the pastor also leads, but I have a hard time finding a balanced schedule. He's not available a lot, and I am left to lead worship most of the time. And when I need a break, he's unavailable. I don't know how to resolve this. I've said it once. I've said it 1,000 times. I will say it 1,000 more times. Communication is the key to a situation like this. What is the problem? You lead worship, and your pastor leads worship, and anytime you want to take a break, you can't because your pastor can't lead for whatever reason. So if you have never talked about it before, then you need to have a conversation with your pastor and simply say, listen, there's sometimes when I can't lead worship, and we need to figure out a plan for what happens when I can't be here on a Sunday. That is a perfectly valid conversation, especially if you're just like a volunteer worship leader. You can't be expected to be there every single week. And so you need to figure out, you say, I have a hard time finding a balanced schedule. First of all, determine what a balanced schedule is for you. What can you actually commit to? And by the way, I'm assuming that you're not on paid staff here or something, because then the conversation kind of changes, because then it's your job to be there, at least the majority of the time. But especially if you're a volunteer, you need to set some boundaries and say, listen, I can lead 3 weeks out of the month or something like that, like take 1 week off every month, but my schedule does not permit me to do more than that right now because I've got other responsibilities as well. Something like that. Now, maybe your schedule's different and you can lead more often than that, but I'm just throwing out an example here. And then you simply say to your pastor, we need to find a solution for somebody who can lead when I'm not here. And maybe your pastor can lead in those situations if they know about it beforehand, and you tell them the dates beforehand, and it's not just like the week before you say, oh, I was planning on taking off this next Sunday or something. If that's the case, then it's probably no wonder your pastor's like, I can't take over because I've got something else going on, although I would assume your pastor would be there anyways, but I also don't like when the pastor leads worship and preaches at the same time. That always feels weird to me. So that's the first thing you need to do, is just talk to your pastor. And if you serve in a healthy church, then you guys will work that out together and figure out a solution. So what are some of those other solutions? Number one, the long-term solution is that you would find other worship leaders that you can raise up in your church. So are you pouring into somebody else right now and trying to make that happen, where if you're away and your pastor isn't able to lead worship, maybe you're both away at the same time, do you have somebody else who can lead worship in your church who can step up? If not, which obviously it sounds like you don't because that's not an option for you right now, then you need to work towards that. So think about, who in my church, maybe there's other people on your worship team. You didn't really say if there was or not. You said, I'm the main singer and the pastor also leads. If you're the main singer, I would assume that there are other singers who aren't the main singer who could potentially lead as well. I'm just going off of what you've written in here. So is there another singer on your team who could potentially lead worship? And I'm not saying that they are 100% ready to do it right now, but that means that you would work with them to try to get them to a point where they can do what you do on a Sunday morning. So you slowly give them songs to lead on their own over time, and then you slowly give them speaking transitions to facilitate the flow of the corporate worship gathering. And then in 6 months, they're able to lead on their own. So that is the long-term solution. The short-term solution is, how can I cover the worship leading position when I'm not able to lead worship, when I'm not around? What are some things that I can do? And you can bring somebody in from the outside to lead worship if you don't have anybody to do that in your church. Are you connected with other worship leaders in your area? If you are, talk to them about it. I know a lot of worship leaders have their own church to lead at, but maybe there's a larger church in your area that has extra worship leaders who, if you talk to their main worship pastor, maybe they could send somebody to lead at your church on a Sunday morning. And that's not like something that I would necessarily want to bank on for the rest of the life of my church, because I want to raise up leaders within my own church. But from time to time, I think it's perfectly acceptable. Or maybe there's somebody else that you know from your community that leads worship that's not serving at a church currently right now, but they could step in and lead on a Sunday or something like that. But you need to work with your pastor to figure out, okay, in the short term, how are we going to cover when one of us can't lead worship? And really, if you're a volunteer and you're just like, the main singer, I'm not sure what that means exactly, but a lot of the responsibility kind of falls on your pastor to figure this out. And you work with your pastor to figure it out, but it is partially their responsibility as well, if they're leading the church, to figure out how are we going to run a Sunday morning gathering. So the long and short of it is, communicate with your pastor, figure out those two things together. What is the long-term solution? Who can we raise up in our church to lead in our absence? And number two, what is the short-term solution? Who can cover for us when we aren't here? We need to figure that out in advance. Now, if you want to develop worship leaders on your worship team, I think a great place to start is by actually having a plan for your worship rehearsals, so that you aren't just like showing up and you're like, okay, you guys sing the background of the song and I'm going to lead the main part of the song for every song. But instead, you focus on systematically developing your worship team. And we do it three ways. We develop them musically so that they get better at music, but we also do it relationally and spiritually as well, so that they grow closer to each other and they grow closer to God. And in that development, we raise up worship leaders who can play their instruments well, who can interact with the team well, and who have a good relationship with God. So if you want to do that, the best place to start is by having a plan for your worship rehearsal, and that's why I put together the worship rehearsal blueprint. I'll link it down below. It is a 5-step process. It's the one that I use every week at my worship rehearsals for what I think is the perfect worship rehearsal that develops your team in those three ways: musically, spiritually, and relationally. So if you're interested in that and your worship rehearsals just have no plan right now, then check that out down in the description below. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me. Till I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.